The night I learned I wasn't the child my parents thought I was, I felt the sting of betrayal deeper than I ever thought possible. It wasn't a fight over something significant, not at first anyway. It was a simple request, one I had never imagined would unravel the very fabric of my family. It started with a phone call from my mom, and for a split second, I thought everything was fine. That feeling faded when her voice dropped an edge. "You know," she said, "your sister sent us $10,000 without hesitation. You can't even send us a fraction of that." The accusation hung in the air, cold and biting. My mind raced. I hadn't even been aware that my sister had sent that much, let alone that it was expected of me. The familiar warmth I usually felt in conversations with my mom felt distant, as if a wall had suddenly been erected between us. I had always believed that no matter how far I was from the ideal, I'd still be enough. Enough for my parents. But in that moment, I wasn't enough. The emotional weight of her words settled over me, and I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me about this? About the money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I needed to understand, needed to know why I was suddenly being held to a different standard than my sister. Then my dad spoke up, his tone far more defensive than I expected. "What are you trying to say?" His voice, usually calm and soothing, was now sharp with an edge I hadn't heard before. I had asked for proof, something tangible to show my sister's generosity, and for that, he seemed to think I was questioning everything they'd ever done for me. But all I wanted was a little clarity, a little understanding. I hadn't even known my sister had been asked to contribute, and yet here I was, labeled the useless child. The days after the phone call with my parents felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't shake the lingering sting of my mom's words. "You're useless, just like I always knew you'd be." I hadn't realized how much weight I had put into their approval, or how deep my desire to feel like I belonged in my family truly ran. I had always been the black sheep of the family, never quite measuring up to the high standards my parents set. My sister Emily, on the other hand, seemed to do everything right. She was successful, financially stable, and always knew the right things to say. She had the ability to step into a room and immediately win over whoever was there, a trait I often envied but could never quite replicate. My parents loved to talk about her accomplishments. I heard them rave about her career, her latest promotion, and her generosity. Emily was the golden child, the one who made the right decisions, who made their lives look perfect. I, however, was always playing catch-up. I wasn't financially independent like Emily. I didn't have a high-paying job, nor could I afford to send them $10,000, or anything close to it. But what struck me the most was how quickly my mom had turned against me when I hadn't met that expectation. The phone call lingered in my mind, playing on repeat. "Why didn't you ask for help?" I had wanted to shout back at her, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself sitting alone in my small apartment, grappling with my own self-doubt. Was I really useless, as she had claimed? My mom had always been the type to hold us to high standards, but this felt different. Her words seemed like a final judgment, a moment of disappointment that pierced me in a way I didn't know I could feel. I tried to talk to Emily about it. She was my sister, after all, and I thought that maybe she could understand my frustration. But when I called her, her response was nothing short of cold. "Well, I don't see why you're upset," Emily said, her voice crisp and distant. "Mom's right. You should have helped. I didn't even hesitate to send them money." I had always felt like Emily held some secret power over me. She wasn't cruel, but she didn't see my struggle the way I did. She had always been the one who could make money work for her while I fumbled, trying to make ends meet, struggling to carve out my own path. Her words stung because, in some strange way, they felt like the truth. It wasn't that I didn't want to help my parents. It was that I didn't have the ability to. I tried to explain, but it felt like no one was listening. You don't understand. I can't just come up with $10,000, Emily, I said, my frustration building. I don't have that kind of money to give. And why didn't anyone tell me about this? Why is this being held against me now? Her response was lukewarm at best. Well, I don't know. Maybe because you've always been different. You don't get it the way I do. I don't know what to tell you. She didn't even try to offer any form of empathy, as if my problems were just part of my personality that I couldn't change. That she didn't see why it was such a big deal, why I was so upset, was its own form of rejection. I couldn't figure out why. In a moment when I was vulnerable, Emily couldn't offer even a sliver of support. Why did she have to take my mom's side so easily? I felt like I was drowning in my own family's expectations, and no one even saw me struggling to stay afloat. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much I resented how everything had always been about Emily, her success, her perfection, her ability to please everyone. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the fact that I had been compared to Emily. It was about everything I had silently dealt with over the years. The feeling of being the underachiever, the one who didn't fit the mold. My relationship with my parents had always been a mix of admiration and resentment, but now there was a palpable divide between us. When I tried to speak with Dad, I wasn't prepared for the way he reacted. His defense of Mom's actions felt like a betrayal, even though I knew he didn't mean it that way. Dad had always been the calm presence in my life, the one I could turn to when things got tough. But in that moment, I realized how much I had depended on his silence to allow me to exist in my own way. When he spoke, his words were sharp, his tone dismissive. "Don't start asking questions," he said when I asked for proof of my sister's $10,000 contribution. "It's not the time for this, and you know it. We did what we had to do." I wanted to scream at him. "What do you mean it's not the time? Why is this happening now?" But I couldn't. My throat closed up with the weight of all the things I wanted to say, and instead, I quietly ended the conversation. But the damage had been done. I felt like I was losing both of my parents. I felt like my worth in this family was defined by how much I could contribute financially, and I was already falling short. But more than that, I felt like my parents had chosen Emily over me, and that was a hurt I couldn't ignore. The tension at home lingered like an uninvited guest. Each passing day felt like it came with a new weight to bear. I couldn't seem to shake the sense of being out of sync with my family, and the more I thought about the phone call, the more my own sense of self began to unravel. I had never been one to take sides in family matters, but this felt different. It felt personal. I tried to focus on work, but my mind wouldn't allow it. I kept replaying the conversation with my mom, the way she had called me useless for not sending money. It wasn't just the accusation that stung, but the finality in her tone, as though she had already written me off. And Emily's indifference, to my distress, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. She had always been the golden child, and now it felt like there was nothing I could do to measure up to her. My heart raced with frustration and resentment. Why did she always get the praise? Why was she the one who always got it right, no matter what? For the first time, I began questioning my own choices, my own life path. Why wasn't I successful? Like Emily? Why wasn't I in a position to send my parents money when they needed it? These questions plagued my mind as I spent long, sleepless nights scrolling through social media, watching Emily's perfect life unfold in front of me. I couldn't help but compare myself to her. She posted pictures from her trips, her new car, the promotions she'd received. And all I had was a job that barely paid the bills and a constant feeling of inadequacy. But as the days went on, I realized something important. I didn't want to be her. I had spent so many years wishing I could live up to her image that I had forgotten who I was. I wasn't her, and that was okay. But that didn't stop the pain of feeling invisible, of feeling like a disappointment in the eyes of my parents. One night, after another argument with my parents about my lack of contribution, I finally reached my breaking point. The emotional weight of everything, the guilt, the shame, the sense of failure, had become too much to bear. I couldn't take it anymore. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated, but this was different. I had never felt so unseen, so unappreciated. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything they had expected from me, everything they still expected. I decided to confront my parents once and for all. I had to make them see how much I was struggling, how much this was hurting me. I couldn't just continue to take their criticism without standing up for myself. But I didn't know where to begin. "I know we've been hard on you," my dad said, his voice quieter now. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't enough. You are, more than you'll ever know." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let his words wash over me, to finally feel the relief I'd been hoping for. But something inside me still hesitated. Maybe it was the years of emotional neglect that I had endured, or maybe it was the sting of my mom's words that still echoed in my mind. "You're useless. I appreciate that, Dad," I said, my voice shaky. "But it's not just about the money. It's never been about the money. It's about feeling like I'm constantly living in Emily's shadow. It's about feeling like no matter what I do, I'll never be good enough for you." My mom shifted in her seat, her arms still crossed. "You think you've always been in Emily's shadow? You're wrong. We never compared you to her." "But you have," I said, my anger rising again. "You do it all the time. Why do you think I've always tried so hard to be what you wanted me to be? I can't keep up with Emily. And when you expect me to do what she does, it makes me feel like I'm failing. It makes me feel like nothing I do will ever be enough." "I didn't realize how much it hurt you," my mom said, her voice softening. "I thought I was pushing you to be better, to be like Emily because I thought that was what you needed. But I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The apology. The vulnerability. It felt real. It felt like a bridge between us had been built in that moment. But even as I wanted to let myself believe, the weight of everything that had led to this moment, hung over me like a cloud. The damage had already been done, and though I could feel the shift in the air between us, I couldn't ignore the hurt I had been carrying all these years. "I don't know what to do with this," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to just move on from everything that's happened." "I understand," Dad said quietly, "but we're here now. We can work through this, together." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that. But maybe, just maybe, this conversation was the first step toward something better. The road to healing was going to be long, but for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. The days following that conversation were heavy with change, but the kind of change I wasn't used to. It wasn't immediate, nothing ever is, but it was palpable. I found myself waking up in the mornings, trying to shake off the lingering sense of uncertainty, but the heaviness I'd been carrying felt lighter, even if just a little. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't constantly fighting an uphill battle with my family. The space that had once been filled with tension and unspoken judgments was now filled with the quiet hum of reconciliation. My mom and dad made an effort. They started calling me more, just to check in, not with the usual expectations, but with genuine curiosity about how I was doing. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a slow shift that left me cautiously optimistic. I wasn't sure where things would go from here, but it felt like we were finally on the same page. Or at least, we were trying to be. I didn't expect the world to change overnight. The emotional scars of the years past didn't just vanish, and neither did the echoes of their old expectations. But I began to feel like I had more room to breathe, and that was enough. For now. My relationship with Emily, however, wasn't as easy to heal. She continued to keep her distance, offering only brief texts and occasional comments on social media. But the callousness that had once defined our interactions began to soften, albeit slowly. The more I tried to talk to her, the more I realized how much of her own frustrations and insecurities I had never understood. Emily had always been the one who had it all together. But now I began to see how much pressure she had been under, how much of her success was a result of her own silent battles. One evening, I sat down and decided to have a heart-to-heart with her. I called her, unsure of what to expect, but I knew I had to try. "Em," I said when she picked up, "I want to talk." "About what?" she asked, her voice guarded, as always. "About us," I said. "About how things have been between us. About the money, yes, but also about everything. I need to know that you understand where I'm coming from. And I need to understand where you're coming from, too." There was a long silence on the other end. "I don't know, man. I've just been trying to keep everything together. I don't think I realized how much I've been pushing you away until now." I could feel the hesitation in her voice, and I knew she wasn't the cold, unfeeling person I had made her out to be. She had always been a mirror of success, and I had always been the one trying to catch up. But maybe, just maybe, we could meet somewhere in the middle. I don't want to feel like I'm constantly falling short, I said, my voice shaky. "I want to be enough. Not in your eyes, not in Mom and Dad's eyes, but in my own." There was a pause. Then she finally spoke, her voice softer. "You are enough. I've always known that, but I never told you. I guess I thought you knew. It. Maybe it wasn't a perfect resolution. Maybe we weren't suddenly the best of friends, but it was a start. A start at being more honest with each other, at shedding the expectations that had always defined us, and simply being. Things weren't perfect, but I didn't expect them to be. They never would be. But something in me had changed. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with my family, to let them see the hurt that had been buried for so long. And in return, they had opened up to me in ways I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about who could give more, or who could do more. It was about being seen for who I was, not for what I could do for them. My parents still called, still checked in, but the tone had shifted. There was no longer an underlying expectation that I should send them money. We didn't talk about that anymore. Instead, we talked about what mattered, what had always mattered. How I was doing, how they were doing, how we could all move forward, together, without the old shadows of comparison hanging over us. And as for Emily, well, I realized that healing would take time. It always did. But we had made a small step, one that gave me hope for a future where we didn't have to be defined by our differences. Maybe we weren't perfect, but we were family, and that meant something. In the end, I learned something important. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being the child who could do everything right. It was about being real. And in that, I had finally found my place, not just in my family, but within myself. The months that followed that conversation were a blur of small victories and quiet realizations. Things weren't perfect, far from it, but they were real. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of expectations crushing me from all sides. My parents, though imperfect, were trying. And so was I. The slow but steady shift in our relationship gave me a newfound sense of peace, a reminder that sometimes healing isn't about grand gestures, but about the quiet steps toward understanding and acceptance. With Emily, it was different. We weren't suddenly close again, but the barrier between us was softer. We were still working through things, still learning how to communicate without judgment or resentment. I didn't expect everything to change overnight, but there was hope. Hope that we could move past the years of comparison and rivalry and find a way to just be there for each other, even if it was in small, imperfect ways. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't just the apology I needed. It was the space to be myself, the freedom to not live up to someone else's idea of who I should be. And in the end, that was enough. We weren't a perfect family, but we were a real one, and sometimes that's all we need to feel like we belong. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. I had finally found my place, not by being who they wanted me to be, but by being who I truly was. And that, for once, felt like enough.